From the age of 15, I supported myself, never accepting a single cent from my family. At 25, I managed to buy my own house, and then my parents sued me for ruining my brother's opportunities. My name is Daniel, and I'm 27, though this story begins much earlier, when I was 15. I've always been someone who dislikes feeling indebted to anyone. Maybe that aversion was born from growing up with parents who kept an invisible scorecard in their heads. Every meal, every trip, every favor they did for us wasn't a gift. Months, even years later, they'd bring it up as if it were a pending debt I had to repay. This made me feel like even basic parenting was something I had to earn, and for a teenager, that feeling leaves a deep mark. Money was always a complicated topic in our house. My parents weren't poor. They both had good jobs, but my younger brother, Ryan, was their golden child. He's 3 years younger than me, and from his birth, everything seemed to revolve around him. Private soccer coaching, expensive camps, designer clothes. No matter the price, my parents never hesitated. But for me, things were different. If I wanted anything beyond the essentials, the answer was a flat, "You don't need it," or "Get a job and buy it yourself." So that's what I did. At 15, while Ryan spent weekends at tournaments or with friends, I was bussing tables at a local cafe. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it gave me my own money and, more importantly, my independence. That job led to another, and then another. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough to pay for community college without asking my parents for a single cent. I remember my father making a casual comment, suggesting I thought I was better than everyone else for not needing their help. At the time, I just laughed it off. College was the turning point where the gap between my family and me grew even wider. While I juggled 2 part-time jobs in my classes, Ryan was finding himself, which apparently meant dropping out of college after 1 semester and spending the next few years bouncing from job to job, quitting each time because he didn't click with the boss. My parents always had an excuse for him: "He's just finding his way, he has so much potential, he's not like you, Daniel." I started to notice a pattern. Any achievement of mine was minimized, but if Ryan did the bare minimum, it was cause for family celebration. At 24, I got a good job in the tech sector. At first, it was nothing special, but I worked hard, absorbed every piece of knowledge I could, and started to climb the ladder. A year later, I was earning enough to think about leaving my small apartment. I didn't tell my parents right away. I already knew how they were. In silence, I started looking for houses. Each open house visit felt surreal, as if I were on the verge of achieving something that had always seemed unattainable. The day I closed on the purchase, I was shaking with emotion. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. I had worked for every brick, for every dollar of that down payment. To break the news, I invited my parents and Ryan over for dinner, thinking maybe they'd be proud. That was my first mistake. The moment they walked through the door, I saw the look on my mother's face. There was no happiness, but a cold calculation. Her eyes scanned the house as if she were taking inventory. My father joked about whether I had secretly won the lottery, and Ryan barely said a word, just wandered through the house as if evaluating it. The only genuine reaction was from my aunt, who had accompanied us and couldn't stop saying how impressed she was. But when we sat down for dinner, the comments began. "It's nice," my mother said, "but don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age?" "Yeah," Ryan chimed in, "you could have helped with other things instead of splurging on this." I set my fork down on the table and, keeping my voice steady, asked what other things he was referring to. My mother looked at me as if I should know. "Your brother has been talking about going back to school," she explained, "but you know how expensive it is. We thought that with this big house you have, maybe you could have contributed a bit to help him get started." I felt as if I had been slapped. Not once had they asked if I needed help with the down payment, the furniture, or the bills. But now that I had something to show for my efforts, they were already mentally allocating it to Ryan. I tried to stay calm. "I worked for this. I didn't ask you for anything. Why is it expected that I pay for Ryan's decisions?" The tension became palpable. My father mumbled something about family and mutual help, and Ryan looked at me as if I had personally betrayed him. The dinner ended abruptly. As they left, my mother gave me a hug that felt more like a grip and whispered, "Don't be selfish, Daniel. We'll talk about this again." I thought maybe they would get over it, but I was wrong. In the following weeks, small comments crept into every conversation. My mother would call and say, "Ryan has been looking at classes, but we just can't make it work without help. It's a shame that someone in the family has the means to help and won't." My father would remind me of everything they had done for me, which felt ridiculous given the little financial help I had received. The point of no return came one Sunday afternoon. I got a text from Ryan, "We need to talk. Come home." I thought maybe he wanted to apologize or at least explain. When I arrived, my parents were there, sitting at the kitchen table with papers, college brochures, tuition breakdowns, and a proposal for how much I could contribute to Ryan's education over the next 4 years. I burst out laughing. The situation was so absurd I couldn't help it. "You seriously made a payment plan for me, for my brother?" I asked. My mother glared at me. "This isn't a joke, Daniel. It's his future. If you care about family, you'll do it." And then, Ryan, without a trace of shame, added, "I mean, it's not like you don't have the money. You bought a house. Why do you get to have all that while I'm stuck here?" Something inside me snapped. I stood up and told them I wasn't going to give them a single cent. I walked out of the house, certain they would be mad for a while. But I didn't imagine they would go so far. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a lawyer. My hands were shaking again, but this time with rage. I read the letter over and over until I absorbed the reality. My own parents were suing me. The argument was willfully depriving a dependent family member of necessary opportunities, referring to Ryan. They presented it as if my refusal to fund his second attempt at college had snatched away his future. The lawsuit asked for a sum suspiciously close to the total tuition cost they had shown me. It also mentioned emotional damages Ryan had suffered because I was flaunting my success. At first, I thought it was a bluff. But it wasn't. Within a week, my mother started calling me daily, alternating between guilt and anger. One day she'd say, "Daniel, you're tearing this family apart. Is it worth losing us for a little generosity?" The next day, she'd be crying on the phone, trying to make me feel the weight of crushing their hopes. Ryan, meanwhile, doubled down on his sense of entitlement. He'd post vague jabs on social media like, "Some people only care about themselves, even if it ruins others' lives," with sad emojis and quotes about family loyalty. His friends and relatives, not knowing the whole story, would comment in commiseration. My father, for his part, told a neighbor at a family gathering that Daniel got too big for his britches and forgot where he came from. They were rewriting history to turn me into the villain. One night, Ryan showed up at my house. He didn't call, just rang the doorbell until I opened it. He looked arrogant. "You know you're going to lose, right?" he said. "Mom and Dad have the lawyer, and the family is on their side. It'll be easier if you just pay now and save yourself the embarrassment." I couldn't believe his nerve. I told him to leave, and when he didn't move, I stepped outside and closed the door. "You have no right to my money, Ryan," I said. "You've had chance after chance, and you've wasted them. This is on you, not me." That's when he said something that stuck in my brain. "You got here because you had it easier than I did. Mom and Dad were harder on me. I deserve a fair shot too." Easier? He thought my life had been easier. I just stared at him. "If you think I had it easy, you weren't paying attention." I went back inside and locked the door. From that night on, the pressure intensified. My parents stopped calling me directly and started going through other relatives, aunts, uncles, even my grandmother. I'd get voicemails like, "Honey, your mother says this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe if you just send your brother a little money to get started, we can all move on," or, "Daniel, your father's pressure isn't right. All this stress isn't helping." Every call was an attempt to wear me down. The lawsuit moved forward. I had to hire my own lawyer just to defend myself from my own family. It didn't matter that it was absurd or that I knew I would win. The emotional toll was crushing. At night, I'd wonder how the same people who were supposed to protect me could do such a thing. Then came the moment I realized they didn't just want my money. They wanted something much bigger. It started with a voicemail from my real estate agent. She sounded concerned. She said she'd received a strange inquiry about my house, asking if it was available for purchase or rent, insinuating that the current occupant might not be there much longer. She didn't give me a name, but I didn't need one. There were only 3 people who knew exactly how to hit me where it hurt most. I called her back immediately, and she confirmed my suspicions. The call hadn't come from a stranger, but from my mother, who had posed as a family friend. My mother had hinted that I might not be able to hold on to the property for long, and that it would be a shame for it to go to waste when another family member could use it. My chest tightened. Another family member. There was no doubt who she was referring to. They didn't just want money, they were setting the stage to take my house. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, staring out the window for what felt like hours. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It wasn't just Ryan's selfishness or my parents' manipulation. It was a deliberate plan to undermine everything I had worked for. The one symbol of independence I had from them, my home, was already being coveted. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces clicked into place. That first dinner, the way my mother's eyes had scanned the house, the comment that it was too much, Ryan's remarks. It had all been a prelude to this. The lawsuit wasn't just about tuition. If they could successfully paint me as someone who was unfairly depriving Ryan, they could use that as legal leverage over my assets. And then came the lowest blow, an email from my lawyer forwarding an amendment to their case. They were claiming that part of the reason they were seeking damages was because the defendant's current housing situation was acquired with funds that could have been allocated to support the plaintiff's education and professional development. In other words, they were trying to argue that my house was proof of my selfishness. They weren't being subtle anymore, they were putting it in writing. That night, I called my mother. I didn't plan what I was going to say, I just needed to understand how she could justify something like this. "Daniel, I was just telling your aunt how proud I am of you," she said, her voice eerily sweet. "Don't pretend, Mom," I replied, my voice trembling. "Why did you call my agent?" There was a pause. Then, without hesitation, she sighed. "I was just looking out for the family. If things don't go your way in court, it would be better for the house to stay with someone in the family rather than strangers. You know Ryan would take good care of it." I felt my jaw clench. "You're planning on me losing my house before the case is even over. You've already decided I'm guilty." "It's not about guilt, Daniel," she said. "It's about doing the right thing for your brother. He's been through so much." "Been through so much?" I interrupted. "He's had every opportunity, while I've been on my own since I was a teenager. I worked for this house. You never helped me, not once. And now you think you can just take it away." Her tone shifted, becoming sharper. "Don't be dramatic. You wouldn't be where you are without how we raised you. We made sacrifices too. This is your chance to give back." Give back. That phrase hit me like a brick. It was the same one she used when I was 16 and refused to give half my paycheck for household expenses while Ryan blew his allowance on video games. It was the same one she used when I was 21 and refused to co-sign his car loan. To her, my success wasn't mine. It was a debt I owed them, one they could collect whenever they wanted. I hung up without another word. It was no longer just rage, it was a mix of betrayal and clarity. In that moment, I understood they would never stop. It didn't matter how much I explained, how much I showed I had built my life without their help. In their minds, Ryan's failures were my responsibility, and anything I had was fair game. The next week, everything got worse. A mutual friend told me Ryan had been bragging to his friends that the house would soon be his. "It's not like he's selling it," Ryan had said with a grin. "Let's just say Mom and Dad are making it happen." Hearing that broke something inside me. I had spent years enduring their small attacks, letting them undermine my achievements because I didn't want to cause trouble. But now they were trying to snatch the one thing that symbolized all those years of effort, all those sleepless nights saving for a future no one else believed in. And that's when I made a decision. If they wanted a war, they would have it. But I wouldn't fight it their way. I would make sure they regretted ever thinking they could take what was mine. The next few weeks were like walking through quicksand. Every day brought a new blow, a new reminder that my own family had become my enemy. My lawyer did what he could, but each new document from their side was like a punch to the gut. The language was so cold, so calculated. It was as if they had erased me as a son and rewritten me as a faceless adversary they had to defeat in court. I stopped sleeping well. Some nights, I'd stare at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if they won? What if they took the house? Where would I go? What would I have left? My home had always been my sanctuary, the first place I could close the door and know no one could get in and tell me what to do. Now, even being in my own living room felt tense, as if the walls weren't mine anymore. My work started to suffer, too. I'd find myself distracted in meetings and falling behind on deadlines because I was buried in legal paperwork. My boss noticed. And while he was understanding when I told him it was a family legal matter, I knew his patience wouldn't last forever. I had worked so hard to build a reputation as a reliable person, someone who could handle anything, and now I was watching it crumble. The worst part was the isolation. My parents had made sure to control the narrative, so most of my relatives believed I was being cruel. Invitations to birthdays, dinners, and casual gatherings started to disappear. I'd see photos posted online, big group shots with smiles and captions like, "Family first," with Ryan in the center and my parents on either side. I wasn't even mentioned anymore. One night, I opened the fridge and realized I hadn't done a proper grocery run in weeks. I'd been living on takeout and what I could grab from the corner store because I didn't have the energy to go shopping. Standing in the dim light of the fridge, staring at a carton of eggs and half a bottle of orange juice, I felt a wave of hopelessness. It wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was the feeling that no matter what I did, I would always be the outsider in my own family. But in that moment, something else ignited. I remembered being 15, standing behind the cafe counter on a Friday night, my hands raw from scrubbing dishes, knowing that the next day I'd have to get up early for a double shift. I had done that for years without a safety net, with no one cheering me on. Every step I had taken since then had been because I refused to give up when it would have been easier to quit. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. I stopped answering their calls. I told my lawyer to handle all communication, no matter how trivial, so I wouldn't have to hear their voices or read their manipulative messages. I started to quietly review my finances, making sure every asset I had was secured. I checked my credit history for anything suspicious. I even installed a security system in my house in case Ryan decided to show up again. In public, I played it cool. If anyone asked how I was, I'd say I was dealing with it and change the subject. In private, I was building a plan. I realized that if I fought them head-on, they would just keep twisting the story until I looked like the aggressor. No, I needed to be smarter. I had to let them dig their own grave and then make sure they couldn't climb out. The first step was to gather evidence, not just for court, but for me. Proof of every manipulative call, every malicious comment, every time they tried to undermine me. If I was going to fight back, I wanted to have everything in writing. Still, I kept my head down. On the surface, it looked like they had broken me into silence. And that was exactly what I wanted them to think, because when you're at your lowest, no one expects you to stand up. And I was going to make sure my comeback hit them harder than they ever expected. It's strange how, once you stop feeding someone's drama, they think you've disappeared. My parents and Ryan seemed to take my silence as proof that they were winning. In reality, it gave me the space I needed to rebuild, not just my defenses, but my life. The first shift came at work. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, and I braced myself for bad news. Instead, he closed the door and said, "Look, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but I know you're good at what you do. If you can focus, I'm willing to put you on a project that could lead to a promotion." It was like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. I threw myself into that project. Long hours, meticulous planning, going the extra mile. I wasn't just trying to prove to my boss what I was capable of, but to myself, too. And it worked. The project was a success, and a few weeks later, I was offered the promotion. With it came a significant raise, enough to make my financial cushion even larger. It didn't erase the stress of the lawsuit, but it made me feel secure again. Meanwhile, my lawyer was quietly dismantling their case. He had managed to get records of Ryan's job history, his failed college attempts, even messages where my parents admitted they had spoiled him too much. Each piece was another thread in the fabric of their hypocrisy. I didn't gloat. Not yet. I simply filed it all away, letting it accumulate. Outside of work, I refocused on myself. I rejoined the gym, partly to clear my head and partly to remind myself that my body didn't have to carry the weight of all this stress. I started cooking real meals again. Nothing fancy, but there was something therapeutic about chopping vegetables and sitting down to eat. I also started reconnecting with people I had distanced myself from. Not the relatives who had believed my parents' version of events. I left them to their group photos and fake smiles, but with old friends and trusted coworkers, people who knew me without the filter of family gossip. Little by little, I rebuilt a circle around me that wasn't poisoned by their manipulation. Then, something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a local networking event for young professionals. Someone had seen the results of my project at work and thought my career trajectory was inspiring. Standing on that stage, telling my story, the professional one, not the messy personal parts, I realized I was no longer the helpless kid bussing tables. I had built something, and no matter what my family thought they could take from me, they couldn't take that away. With every win, big or small, I felt the scales tipping. My parents still had their lawsuit, but outside of that courtroom, their control over me was fading. They couldn't guilt-trip me with calls I didn't answer. They couldn't twist my words if I didn't give them any. They had to communicate through lawyers for everything, which meant no more surprise ambushes at my door or accidental encounters at family gatherings. The best part was, while they were busy burning bridges with me, they were also undermining their own credibility. A mutual acquaintance let it slip that some relatives were starting to question why my parents would take me to court instead of helping Ryan get his life together. Apparently, Ryan had been bragging so openly about getting the house that even people on his side were starting to see how bad it looked. That's when I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was gaining ground. My career was stronger. My finances were secure. And I had allies who saw through their lies. I was now in a position where I didn't have to react to their moves. I could plan my own. And as much as I wanted to strike back immediately, I forced myself to wait, because I realized that timing was everything. Let them think I was just moving on with my life. Let them keep underestimating me. Because the next time I made a move, I wouldn't just be protecting what was mine. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon, of all days. I was leaving a client meeting when my phone buzzed with an email from my lawyer. The subject read, Discovery Request, Opposing Counsel Error. Inside was a forwarded email chain. My parents' lawyer had accidentally copied my lawyer on an email thread that was meant to be internal, and in it was a goldmine. The chain was mostly about logistics, deadlines, filing dates. But halfway down, there was a message from my mother to their lawyer that made my pulse quicken. She had written, We need to make sure Daniel's house is included in any settlement. Ryan has already been in touch with a realtor friend who can list it as soon as it's transferred to us. This is the cleanest way to ensure he gets a fresh start. There it was, in writing. Proof that the lawsuit was never about helping Ryan go to school. It was about transferring my house into his name. My lawyer practically hummed with energy when we spoke that night. This changes everything, he told me. They've essentially admitted to ulterior motives. We can use this. But I didn't just want to use it to defend myself. I wanted to build it into the foundation of something bigger, something that would put an end to their ability to ever do such a thing again. Around the same time, work presented another opportunity. My promotion had put me in charge of a small team, but now I was being offered an interdepartmental leadership role on a high-visibility project. It came with two major perks, significantly higher income and connections to senior executives in industries far beyond my current reach. The kind of people who, if needed, could open doors I didn't even know existed. I accepted without hesitation. This not only further strengthened my financial position but also gave me flexibility, the ability to quietly funnel resources where I needed them. And one of the first things I did was hire a private investigator. I didn't want anything illegal or invasive. I just wanted the truth. I wanted to know exactly what Ryan had been doing while his future was supposedly hanging in the balance, and if my parents had a history of pulling similar moves on other relatives. The investigator didn't disappoint. 2 weeks later, I had a thick folder on my desk. Inside were social media posts from accounts Ryan thought were private, showing him on trips, buying expensive electronics, and even test-driving cars in the months he had been claiming he was barely getting by. There were also property records that showed my parents had, years ago, tried to pressure my late aunt into selling them a piece of land for a fraction of its value. Something that had caused a rift no one talked about anymore. The more I read, the clearer my path became. I didn't just need to win the case. I needed to dismantle the narrative they had built, piece by piece, in front of an audience that mattered. To do that, I started to quietly lay the groundwork. I reached out to a few trusted relatives who had stayed neutral, sharing just enough to plant seeds of doubt about my parents' version of events. I made sure my financial records, work history, and proof of independence since I was a teenager were well documented, dated, and ready to be shown to anyone relevant. And best of all, that incriminating email chain wasn't the only mistake they made. My investigator had managed to uncover a legally recorded conversation in a public place where Ryan was bragging to a friend at a bar about how he had finally found a way to cash in on having a rich brother. The friend had laughed, asking if I had agreed. And Ryan replied, "Nah, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and I'll be set for life." I listened to that recording 3 times in a row. Each time, I felt the same cold clarity. They thought they were about to catch me, but in reality, they had already handed me the tools to destroy them. All I had to do now was choose the perfect time to strike. I waited, not out of hesitation, but because I knew the most devastating blow isn't a loud, angry attack. It's a quiet, precise one. My parents and Ryan were still moving forward with their case, oblivious to the fact that they had already set the stage for their own downfall. The trial date was approaching, and with it, the pre-trial conference. The meeting where both sides would lay out their strongest positions to evaluate if a settlement was possible. That was my stage. When we walked into the conference room, my parents were there with Ryan, who was sitting arrogantly between them. My mother gave me that self-satisfied smile she used when she thought she had the upper hand. My father avoided my gaze, a silent gesture of fake disappointment. Ryan, of course, was leaned back in his chair as if he were already signing the deed to my house. The mediator began with the formalities and then asked my lawyer to speak first. We had agreed beforehand, no emotion, no long speeches, just facts. My lawyer slid a thin folder across the table toward their side. "This," he said, "is a full documentation of my client's financial independence since he was 15. Employment records, tax returns, proof of tuition payments, and property purchase receipts. You'll note that not a single cent came from the parents at any point." Ryan scoffed under his breath, but my lawyer didn't stop. He opened the folder to a marked page. "And here," he said in a firm voice, "is an email from the plaintiffs, in their own words, confirming that the primary goal of this lawsuit is to obtain the defendant's house to transfer it to another party." My mother's face drained of color so fast it was almost comical. My father's lips tightened. Ryan leaned forward trying to read the page, his confidence faltering. "And finally," my lawyer said, pressing a button on his laptop, a brief audio clip. Ryan's voice filled the room. "Nah, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and I'll be set for life." Silence. You could hear the wall clock ticking. My lawyer let the silence hang for a good 5 seconds before saying, "Given these facts, we believe the court will not only dismiss the case but will find grounds for us to file a countersuit for damages, including legal fees and harm to reputation." The mediator cleared his throat and looked at their lawyer. "Do you wish to respond?" Their lawyer's face was tight, his jaw working as if he were chewing nails. He leaned in to my parents, whispering urgently. My mother shook her head quickly, her eyes darting to me with something that almost looked like fear. Ryan muttered something under his breath that made my father glare at him. Finally, their lawyer straightened up. "We need a moment to discuss this privately." They left the room. I sat there, hands clasped, not saying a word. Inside, I felt that strange, satisfying calm that comes when you know the fight is already over. 10 minutes later, they came back in, their expressions carefully blank. "We are willing to drop the lawsuit," their lawyer said stiffly, "with each party covering their own legal fees." My lawyer didn't even look at me before responding. "That is unacceptable. We have clear evidence of malicious intent and will proceed with our countersuit unless we receive a written apology, a public retraction of all previous statements made against my client, and the full reimbursement of his legal costs." Ryan's head snapped to my parents. "We're not going to—" "Yes, we are," my mother interrupted, her voice tight. And that was it. In that room, they surrendered. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat, I didn't even look at Ryan as he sat there fuming. I let the paperwork speak for me. By the end of the week, I had the apology letter in my inbox, a clumsy attempt at sounding sincere, and the reimbursement check cleared soon after. But that wasn't the real revenge. The real blow came when I sent copies of the apology and the incriminating evidence to the handful of relatives who had ostracized me over the last year. No explanations, just the documents. Within days, the phone calls started, not from my parents, but from those same relatives, awkwardly asking how I was, clearly realizing they had bet on the wrong horse. I didn't return most of them, because the point of revenge, I realized, wasn't to win them back. It was to make sure they understood I didn't need them and that trying to tear me down only made me stronger. The fallout was swift and ugly. Although, for once, I didn't have to deal with any of it. News of what had happened spread through the family faster than I expected. My aunt, the one who had been so impressed with my house the day they saw it, called me half angry, half stunned. "They tried to take your house from their own son?" She wasn't the only one. Cousins, uncles, even my grandmother. The people who had been silent before were suddenly talking. The family chat I had been quietly removed from months ago became a battleground. Screenshots of the apology letter started to surface. And every time someone tried to defend my parents, another relative would drop a quote from the email or Ryan's bragging recording. For the first time in my life, the golden image my parents had built for themselves cracked in public. They stopped attending family gatherings, not because they weren't invited, but because they couldn't stand the questions. My mother, who had once reveled in being the center of attention, started avoiding calls from her own siblings. My father became quieter, grayer, somehow. He was no longer the imposing, self-assured man who used to laugh at my independence. And Ryan, he took it the worst. His supposed friends, whom he had bragged to about cashing in, started to distance themselves. With no house, no settlement, he had nothing to show for the months he had spent circling me like a shark. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved out of my parents' house for a while and then quietly moved back in when rent and bills proved to be too much. The arrogance I had seen in his eyes at that pre-trial conference was gone. Now, when our paths occasionally crossed, out of some unavoidable family obligation, he would barely meet my eyes. The check they sent me covered every cent of my legal fees. But it was the apology letter I kept, tucked away in a drawer. Not because I needed the validation, I didn't, but because it was proof. Proof that no matter how much they tried to rewrite the story, there was a moment when they had to admit they were wrong. I didn't seek reconciliation. I didn't turn the page for the sake of family harmony. Instead, I continued building the life I had been creating. Work kept getting better. My circle of trusted friends stayed tight, and my home remained exactly where it belonged, with me. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch in the quiet of the evening, I think about that first dinner I invited them to, when I thought they might be proud. I think about how quickly their masks fell when they saw what I had built without them. And I realized that the real victory wasn't just keeping my house or winning the case. It was proving, beyond all doubt, that I never needed them to succeed and that no matter what they tried, they could never take that away. And that's when I lean back, smile to myself and think, this house will never have their name on it.